"Hi, my name's Michael, and a few hours ago, I stood in line at the bus terminal, bags packed, plans set, ticket in hand. Then he showed up, my stepfather. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just looked me dead in the eye and tore my ticket in half. Said, 'You're not going to Chicago. Stay home, handle things.' And just like that, everything I paid for, everything I planned, was gone. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I walked to that counter, and I did something none of them saw coming. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd fold. They didn't realize I was the one holding the card all along. So when the boarding started, and they stepped up with their broken tickets, let's just say, that's when everything unraveled. What would you do if the people who claimed to love you kept you small just to keep control? Keep watching. This wasn't the end. It was the shift. I got to the terminal early. Too early, maybe. The air inside still carried last night's mop water and the first brewed coffee of the morning. The place wasn't buzzing yet, just stirring. I sat 2 rows from the ticket counter, hands resting on my duffel bag, the same one I'd used since college. It had a tear in the side pocket and still smelled faintly of my old gym socks, though I'd washed it more times than I could count. I kept staring at the departure board, Chicago, 9:15 a.m. on time. I didn't feel nervous. Not really. Just quiet. It wasn't like I was running away. I'd left a note on the fridge. I'd packed light. I wasn't slamming any doors or making a speech about needing space or respect. I wasn't chasing a dream. I just needed a break. A start, maybe. One I didn't have to justify. Around me, people were talking. A woman argued on the phone about a missing bag. 2 kids played tag between the benches until their mom pulled them back with a sharp whisper. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone was going somewhere. So was I. Or at least, that's what I thought. The line to board had started forming. I waited until it shortened, then stood up, ticket in hand, and joined behind a tall guy with a cowboy hat. Felt like any other Tuesday. Then I heard his voice. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" I didn't even have to turn. My shoulders stiffened on instinct. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't felt him step into my space. But there he was, Wade, my stepfather. Tall, wide, and angry, even when he smiled. He didn't touch me, not yet, but his presence pressed on me like a weight. People nearby paused, conversations thinned. Even the 2 kids stopped laughing. "Turn around," he said, louder this time. "You're not going to Chicago." I didn't answer. My eyes stayed forward, locked on the ticket agent scanning IDs. He stepped closer. I could smell the peppermint gum he always chewed after smoking. I said, he snapped, and before I could breathe, his hand reached out, grabbed the ticket from my fingers like he owned it, and then he tore it. Just like that. The sound was sharper than I expected, like someone had ripped a flag in half. My ticket. Paid for with my own money. Bought on my own card. The 2 halves fluttered to the ground like something dead. "You're staying here," Wade said. "You're gonna handle what needs to be handled at home. You don't just leave." There wasn't yelling. Not from him, not from me. But the silence afterward was louder than anything else. I felt the eyes, the scanning. Nobody spoke up. No one asked if I was okay. The cowboy hat guy shifted awkwardly. A woman behind me cleared her throat and turned her back. A teenager lowered his phone, probably hoping for a scene. But there wasn't one. I bent down, picked up the 2 halves of the ticket like they were nothing special, like I dropped a grocery list. Wade had already turned away, as if tearing my plans was the same as taking out the trash. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Not yet. There was just this weird stillness inside me, like someone had unplugged the radio and the hum stopped. I walked over to the counter, laid the torn ticket down, and said, "I need to cancel all of them." "All of them?" The woman blinked. "Yes," I said. "Every ticket under my card." She glanced at the name. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. I didn't explain. I didn't owe her anything, or him, or anyone. I turned from the counter and walked out. No slamming doors, no yelling. But as I stepped back into the parking lot, past the Greyhound logo and the plastic planters with wilted flowers, something inside me shifted. Everyone thought that was the end of it, but I hadn't decided anything yet. I stepped away from the line, holding the torn ticket, and that's when the silence became louder than the crowd. A rolling suitcase bumped against my leg. Some guy walking by, probably late for his bus. But he didn't apologize, just glanced at me and kept going. The boarding announcement came over the speaker again. Same voice, same tone. Nothing had changed, except I wasn't going anywhere anymore. I stood there, 5 feet from where I'd been, and already I felt like I had crossed some invisible barrier. I wasn't in line. I wasn't one of them anymore. Those people moving forward, boarding buses, going somewhere. I'd stepped out. I'd been pulled back. Behind me, Wade's footsteps were calm, casual, as if he had just finished grocery shopping and was ready to head home. "You heard me," he said. His voice wasn't raised. "Let's not make this a thing." I didn't turn to face him, just stared at the vending machine near the corner. The bright red button on the Coke machine flickered slightly. "I'm not making anything," I replied. My voice came out flat, even, controlled. "Good," he said, "because you've got things to take care of. You don't just leave. We're not done at home." That word, home, felt off in his mouth, like he was using it to mean my property. Not a place of comfort, but of duty, of being tethered. He didn't say it like it was a request. He said it like I'd forgotten my job, and he was here to remind me. I looked around. A woman with a coffee cup gave me a glance, half a second, and looked away. A teenage boy was scrolling through his phone, earbuds in, completely disengaged. No one was watching anymore, and the few who were didn't care. No one said anything to Wade. No one asked him what right he had. They just let it happen, because that's how it works. Silence is stronger than shouting when it comes from a whole room. "You're gonna stay," he said, his voice low now, like we were back in the living room and he was laying out the rules again. "You're gonna handle things. Don't make your mother worry more than she already does." That line, that exact line, he'd used it since I was 15. Handle things. Always vague enough to mean anything, but heavy enough to carry guilt. It meant staying behind to help with bills. It meant running errands no one else would. It meant missing job interviews because someone else needed the car. It meant quieting my own life for the sake of everyone else's noise. I never argued outright, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned the cost of confrontation. You raise your voice once, and suddenly you're the problem. You cause stress. You blow things out of proportion. You make the family uncomfortable. And God forbid you make the family uncomfortable. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. Thought about saying something, anything. I could call him out, right there, in front of everyone. Ask him what exactly I was handling. Ask him when it became my job to play cleanup crew for everyone's chaos. But I didn't. Not because I was scared, because it wouldn't change anything. Not today. Instead, I slipped my hands into my pockets, felt the crumpled ticket paper like a scab I couldn't peel off yet. "You finished?" I asked. He didn't answer. He took it as agreement and walked toward the exit. I stayed behind a moment longer, letting the terminal fill again with movement. The line for the 9:15 was gone now. A new one formed at Gate 4. More luggage, more chatter, more motion. People moved on. I didn't. It was like watching a carousel from the ground. Everyone spinning in circles, waving from plastic horses, laughing, but you're just standing there, stuck. That's what made the shame worse, not his words, not the torn ticket, but how easily the world accepted it, how quickly everyone let it happen. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was outside of something I used to be inside of, and that feeling, more than anything, sat like a stone in my chest. That was when I understood this wasn't about Chicago. It was about who I was expected to be. I sat down on the hard bench near the vending machines, ticket pieces still in my pocket. The sound of rolling luggage faded into a steady hush, like waves pulling back from shore. I didn't even realize I was staring until a soft flicker of movement caught my eye. A janitor pushing a mop past the edge of the terminal doors. The way he moved, not rushed, not slow, just methodical. It tugged at something familiar. That was how I'd been living. Not seen. Not in the way people mean when they say they see you, but in the way furniture sees you. Always present, always useful, but never central. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching nothing in particular. The smell of bleach hit my nose, sharp and clean, and just like that, I was back at our kitchen sink. Mom standing at the stove, Wade in his recliner, and me at the sink, scrubbing a pot nobody else wanted to deal with. "Hey," she'd say, without turning. "Can you handle that while I get his plate?" Not your dad, his plate. That was years ago. Same tone, same rhythm. And that was the first time I didn't argue. After that, it became habit. I was the one they called when the fence broke and Wade didn't feel like fixing it. The one expected to drive out to pick up prescriptions when Mom couldn't remember if she ordered them. The one who quietly sent the extra $100 when my brother's car suddenly needed repairs, but never got a thank you text. Not once. And when I didn't say anything, the pattern wrote itself. I looked down at my hands, at the callus near my thumb from years of lifting warehouse boxes. My body knew how to carry things. So did my mind. I'd been carrying other people's weight so long, I stopped noticing it wasn't mine. The memories came fast, but they weren't dramatic. They were ordinary, real, familiar. The Christmas I paid for half the groceries but wasn't asked what to cook. The time they booked a weekend at the cabin without telling me, and then sent me a Venmo request for utilities because they used my name on the reservation to get the discount. Authorized, but not invited. It was like that with everything. "We needed to use your card because yours has the cash back," Wade said once, casually, while watching the game. And I nodded because I had told them to use it. I wanted to help. But help had turned into expectation. Expectation turned into obligation. And somewhere along the line, they forgot I had a say. Or maybe I was the one who forgot. Because I told myself this was maturity, that I was being smart, keeping the peace, that I was doing what needed to be done. I gave them grace. I gave them room. I gave them me, little by little, piece by piece. And in return, they gave me silence when I said I needed out. I rubbed my fingers together, the edges of the ticket still ghosting against my skin. No one had physically stopped me from getting on that bus, but they didn't have to. The role I'd been playing all these years had already written the rules. The truth hit me harder than Wade's voice ever could. This wasn't just a rough morning. This was the echo of every small choice I made to put myself second. Every time I swallowed the frustration, every time I said, I got it, instead of, I need help. I hadn't been pushed into this place. I'd stood in it so long, it became mine. I looked back up at the screen showing departure times. One by one, buses pulled out and disappeared down the long road behind the lot. I didn't even care about Chicago anymore. It could have been anywhere. It could have been nowhere. It wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the fact that I wasn't allowed to choose one. The loudspeaker popped back on, announcing boarding for a route I wasn't part of. I blinked. The terminal returned to itself. Fluorescent lights, the beep of a scanner, the quiet shuffle of people in line. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. That's when I named it. I didn't say it out loud. There was no one to hear it. But I said it to myself. They only keep me around because I don't say no. And once I named it, even in silence, I couldn't unsee it. I could have kept playing that role, but something small was already slipping out of their control. I stayed there for a long while, still, the kind of stillness you don't realize you're capable of until you've got nothing left to fidget with. No plan, no explanation to rehearse. The light was shifting, softer now, edging into the warm tone that always shows up right before real daylight breaks in. I'd moved closer to the big windows, maybe just to feel like I was still going somewhere, even if I wasn't. My bags rested beside me, untouched. No one came after me. No one even glanced twice. That kind of invisibility used to feel like safety. Today, it felt like something else. There wasn't anger in me, not exactly. It was more like all the fight had gone quiet. Then, without warning, a vibration in my coat pocket. I pulled out my phone. A message from my niece, Maddie. Uncle D, I left my drawing at your place last time. Can you bring it next weekend? Mom said we might come. She added 3 stickers, a cat, a red crayon, and a slice of pizza. Always those 3. That small, normal message hit harder than Wade's voice ever could. Maddie never asked for much. She just assumed I'd be there. That I always was. That I always would be. And there was something sweet about that. Honest. But it was also the very thing I'd let keep me stuck. I'd let love make a cage and called it duty. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Thought about replying. Thought about calling my sister and saying no. Saying I wouldn't be home. Wouldn't be around. But I didn't. Not because I couldn't, but because the truth is, I didn't know what to say that didn't sound like betrayal. My fingers hovered above the screen, then dropped back into my lap. I could picture the weekend. Maddie running into the living room, her markers everywhere. Me on the couch pretending not to be too tired to play along. Dinner with my sister and Wade. Him talking like everything was normal. Me pretending the ticket incident never happened. Pretending I was fine. That we were fine. That image came easy. Too easy. And it almost worked. That's the part that scared me. Because I knew how to do that version of life. Knew the rules, the beats, the way to keep things moving without raising dust. And there was comfort in that rhythm, no matter how it buried me. But when I imagined myself walking back through that door, I felt it like weight on my chest. Not loud, not sharp, just heavy, like something that would press on me a little more each day. Not enough to knock me over, but enough to keep me bent. That's the cost, isn't it? It's never one big sacrifice. It's hundreds of small ones, days given away without protest, hours handed over without asking what I needed them for. I'd spent years becoming a man everyone could count on, and no one thought to ask what that was costing me. The ache started right behind my sternum. Not pain, exactly, just tight. I shifted on the bench, but it didn't help. My throat wasn't dry, but I swallowed anyway. A quiet habit, like checking to make sure I could still feel something. I didn't cry. I didn't want to. But something in me wobbled, just for a second. It was like when a building settles, that groan in the foundation that says, "This was never meant to carry so much weight." I pressed the heel of my hand to my chest, not hard, just grounding. My body was having a conversation my mind wasn't ready for. I looked up. The window glass had started to glow gold from the outside. Morning, full and unavoidable. The world kept spinning, like it always did, whether I stood still or not. And in that quiet moment, I realized there would be no fight. No shouting match, no slammed door or big exit speech. That wasn't how this would change. It would change when I stopped cooperating with the version of myself they expected. When I stopped giving the yes they counted on. And that would start right here, right now, with no big gesture. Just stillness, just not going back. I rose slowly, stiff. Not because I was tired, but because it had been a long time since I stood up for myself in any real way. My bags were still there, exactly where I left them. I didn't touch them, not yet. I just stood in that golden light, alone, breathing a little easier. Not because everything was better, but because for the first time, staying quiet didn't feel like strength. It felt like surrender. A shift happened the moment I stopped fighting myself. I didn't walk away. I didn't sit back down. I just stood there, still, but awake. That's when I noticed the one detail I'd been ignoring all morning. My wallet was in my hand. I don't remember pulling it out, but there it was. Worn leather, bent slightly at the corners, heavier than usual. And not just because of the cards and IDs inside. It was heavier because, suddenly, I realized what it meant. He tore the paper, but he didn't cancel the payment. The ticket he destroyed wasn't the only one. I'd booked them myself, mine, his, Mom's, even Maddie's for next month. I'd used the card they all seemed to forget was mine. Not a joint account, not some family fund myth. My name, my card, my balance paid. He shouted, he postured. But I was the one who had signed the slip. It sounds small, but in that moment, it changed everything. I sat back down for a second, not out of defeat, but to steady my thoughts. The terminal was louder now, voices rising with the crowd, footsteps shuffling as the next wave of travelers moved into position. An older man nearby was quietly unwrapping a breakfast sandwich, the crinkle of the foil snapping me back to focus. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, wallet still in hand. I replayed it. The scene in the line. Him reaching forward. That practiced sense of entitlement he wore like a badge. The way he didn't even ask what I was doing, just told me what I wouldn't be doing. But here's the truth. The system didn't care who tore the ticket. It only cared who paid for it. And that was me. A quiet breath escaped my lips. Not relief. Clarity. Like something foggy had clicked into a sharp outline. There was power in that. Not the kind that shouted or slammed doors. The kind that sat in numbers, in authorizations, in records no one could override with a barked command. He could say I wasn't going to Chicago, but he couldn't erase the fact that I had bought the ticket. That's when it hit me harder. All these years, I'd confused loudness with control. He barked louder. He interrupted more. He made decisions mid-sentence like punctuation. But behind all of that noise was a pattern, a reliance, one that leaned on me, my account, my name, my silence. I'd been the backup plan so long, I forgot I was the foundation. No one asked if I wanted that role. They just kept handing it to me, and I kept taking it. Not because I was weak, but because it was easier. Because peace came cheaper than disruption. But now I saw it clearly. They trusted me with money, but not with choice. Trusted me to handle things, as long as things didn't include myself. That contradiction tasted bitter in my mouth. I looked around. The terminal was waking up completely. A final boarding call buzzed through the intercom, followed by a pause and then a flurry of movement from the opposite side of the terminal. Travelers grabbed bags, adjusted jackets, gave quick hugs. That would have been me. Then again, maybe not. Because if I'd boarded, I'd still be carrying their permission in my pocket instead of my own decision. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of my debit card. It felt cold, smooth, real. Not like the fantasy of getting away, but like the very tool I could use to define what came next. My breath evened out. I wasn't sure what this would stir up once they realized. He'd be furious. My sister would plead reason. Maybe Mom would sigh and call it one of your moods again, that old tune. But this wasn't about rebellion. It was about right. I didn't need a fight. I didn't need permission. I didn't even need forgiveness. All I needed was action, not noise, not tears. Just the simple process of doing what I was already authorized to do. I stood again, and this time I turned. Not toward the exit, toward the counter. I walked slowly, not dragging my feet, not rushing, just steady. The woman behind the desk was helping someone, but she glanced up briefly. Her eyes met mine, then dropped back to her screen. There was no flash of drama, no suspense, just another man in line with a wallet and a decision. I waited my turn. I kept breathing. The announcements continued overhead. Somewhere behind me, people shifted and murmured and moved. Life went on. But for me, right there, that line wasn't just for a ticket. It was for the first thing I would do without asking who I needed to be first. I didn't know how they'd react, but I knew exactly what I was about to do. The terminal buzzed around me, a low murmur of announcements and wheels rolling across tile. I stepped out of the slow tide of passengers and made my way toward the service counter, bypassing a small group adjusting their luggage. There was no ceremony in my stride, no hesitation either, just movement, forward. The woman behind the counter looked up as I approached. She was in her 50s, maybe older, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes scanned my face, then shifted to the wallet in my hand. "Next," she said plainly. I stepped up. "I'd like to cancel the tickets purchased on this card," I said, placing it on the counter between us. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. "Which tickets?" "All of them," I replied. "Same card. Today's date." She tilted her head slightly, not skeptical, just surprised. She reached for the card and began typing. Her hands moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of routine. I could see the exact moment the names populated on her screen. Her eyes flicked up, then back to the monitor. 4 tickets. Yes. There was no need to explain, no backstory, no mention of the scene in the line, the torn paper, or the man who thought volume meant power. Can I see some ID? She asked, her tone neutral. I handed it over. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was administrative. Clean. She verified, clicked a few more times, and nodded to herself. Found them. All for this morning's departure. Chicago. I nodded once. You want to cancel the entire transaction? Yes, I said again, calmly. She didn't argue. She didn't try to double-check my intentions or suggest an alternative. She simply did her job. I watched the screen reflect her progress. Each name, mine, his, my mother's, Maddie's, faded from the list one by one. There was a quiet pause before the final confirmation window appeared. The screen turned slightly, just enough that I could see the option. Cancel all. A soft electronic chime echoed behind the desk as the system waited for a decision. She glanced at me for one last nod. I gave it. And just like that, it was done. The moment didn't explode. It didn't erupt into some cinematic release. There were no tears, no dramatic music in my head, only a steady exhale, a long, controlled breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I stepped back from the counter and took 2 slow steps to the side. Behind me, the announcement board flickered. Final boarding call for the route I had just erased. A man 2 feet to my left muttered something about traffic. A child tugged at his mother's coat, asking for a snack. And me? I stood in stillness. My hands were empty now. No ticket, no plan. Just the knowledge that I had followed through. No one knew yet. Not my stepfather, not my mother, not Maddie. They were probably somewhere nearby, assuming everything was proceeding as usual. Maybe he thought tearing the ticket had ended the conversation, that his voice was the last word. But he had torn paper. I had canceled passage. That's the thing about authority. Real power doesn't shout. It verifies. It confirms. It follows the systems no one else pays attention to. Until suddenly, those systems say no. I hadn't made a scene. I had made a decision. And with that decision, consequences had begun moving toward them. Quiet, steady, undeniable. The adrenaline that had kept me upright for the last half hour had burned off. In its place was something different. Not relief, not regret. Just clarity. I turned away from the counter as another customer stepped forward, unaware of anything but their own journey. The sun was higher now. Its rays were catching the edge of the metal benches, warming the cold tile floors. My bag sat where I had left it earlier, untouched. I bent, lifted it, and slung the strap over my shoulder. I could feel a shift behind me. Not literal footsteps yet, but the beginning of a stir. The faint, spreading tension of a plan unraveling. The kind that starts with confusion, then builds into questions, then into blame. But that was no longer my problem. I didn't look back, but I knew they were about to. The boarding announcement rolled through the terminal, calm and practiced, the way all announcements are. A few heads lifted at once, bags were pulled upright. People stood with that subtle urgency that comes when a plan moves from waiting to action. I stayed where I was. From my seat near the windows, I could see the line forming again, reshaping itself with purpose. My stepfather was near the front, the torn pieces of paper still clutched in his hand like proof of something he believed couldn't be questioned. My mother stood slightly behind him, her posture already tense. Maddie hovered close, quiet, eyes flicking between them and the gate. They moved forward together, The agent at the gate took the papers, frowned gently, and scanned the barcode area out of habit. There was a pause, not long, but noticeable. Fingers tapped keys. The agent leaned closer to the screen. Another pause. My stepfather shifted his weight. "It's right there," he said, tapping the counter with one finger. "We're boarding." The agent didn't react to his tone. She typed again, then looked up, meeting his eyes without challenge or apology. "Sir," she said evenly, "this ticket has been canceled." The words landed flat. No edge, no emphasis, just information. "What?" he said, louder than necessary. "It's no longer active in our system." "That's not possible," he replied, waving the torn paper. The agent held up a hand, calm but firm. "Whoever purchased the ticket has canceled it. There's nothing I can do." People nearby started paying attention. Conversations trailed off. Someone behind them leaned slightly to see what was happening. A man with a rolling suitcase sighed impatiently. My stepfather's face changed. The confusion cracked into something sharper. "We didn't cancel anything," he said. "You need to fix this." The agent shook her head. "The transaction is complete." That was the moment the power shifted, not because of volume, not because of argument, but because the system had already spoken, and it wasn't on his side. My mother stepped forward, her voice quieter but strained. "There must be a mistake. We're traveling together." The agent glanced at the screen again. "I'm sorry. These seats are no longer assigned." Behind them, the line stalled. The pressure of waiting bodies pressed in. Someone muttered. Someone else checked their watch. "Call a supervisor," my stepfather snapped. The agent nodded and lifted her radio. "She didn't rush. I watched it all from a distance, the way you watch weather move in after you've already closed the windows. I didn't feel exposed. I didn't feel victorious either. I felt still." Maddie turned first. Her eyes found me across the terminal. Wide, questioning. Then understanding crept in, slow and unsettled. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. My stepfather followed her gaze. When he saw me, seated and calm, something in his expression hardened. The pieces aligned. Not fully, but enough. The supervisor arrived, listened, nodded, and confirmed what had already been said. The tickets were canceled. Boarding continued without them. Around us, the terminal moved on. People stepped past them. The line began to flow again, bending around the obstruction they'd become. The spectacle had shifted. I was no longer the one being watched. My stepfather's jaw tightened. His voice dropped when he turned toward me, stripped of performance now that the crowd had stopped listening. "You did this," he said. I didn't respond. Silence had changed sides. He took a step toward me, anger barely contained, eyes sharp with accusation rather than confusion. My mother said my name, softly, like a warning. Maddie stayed still. That was when he turned fully toward me. Not confused anymore, just furious. Now it was anger. That was when he turned toward me. Not confused anymore, just furious. His stride was quick, tight, the kind of walk that's meant to intimidate without crossing the line into a scene. But the line had already been crossed, and not by me. He stopped just short of where I sat, leaning in close enough that only I could hear him at first. "You think you're clever, huh?" His voice was low, but it hit hard. "You think canceling a few tickets makes you grown?" I didn't say anything. "You just humiliated your family in front of 100 strangers. Is that what you wanted?" he asked, eyes narrowing. You wanted to make a show? He wasn't asking. He was laying down blame like bricks, one after the other, fast enough to trap me before I could move. You ruined everything. You know that, right? He continued, standing a little taller now. All the arrangements, the timing, people are depending on us. But no, it's always about you, your little rebellions, your quiet punishments. Behind him, my mother stayed where she was. Maddie had inched off to the side, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The gate had mostly cleared. Those still nearby weren't pretending not to listen anymore. You embarrassed me, he said, voice tightening. You embarrassed her. He motioned toward my mother, like she were a prop in a courtroom. She raised you better than this. I blinked slowly. The words hit like a familiar cold. I'd heard them before, in different tones, different settings, but the same message. You're the problem. It was the oldest script in our house, well-rehearsed, efficient, and always flipped outward just enough to keep the guilt from settling on anyone else. I let him talk. I didn't flinch, didn't fold my arms, didn't sigh. He was counting on a reaction. Any reaction. Even an apology would have given him the moral upper hand again. When he realized I wasn't biting, he raised his voice, just slightly. And what exactly do you think you've done here? He asked. Proved a point? You think money makes you right? You think paying for something gives you the right to decide everything? That was his cue to appeal to the crowd now gathered around us, not with eyes, but with ears. This wasn't just about authority anymore. This was about restoring his image. If he couldn't beat me in private, he'd try to win in public. He let the silence stretch, as if expecting applause. I stayed seated. Then came the classic line, the one that always hit hardest in the past. You're ungrateful, he said. We gave you everything. He meant the roof, the dinners, the illusion of stability. Never mind the strings that came with each favor. Never mind the silence that was always required in return. My chest tightened, not with hurt, but with clarity. This wasn't about gratitude. This was about control. I exhaled, steady. You're lucky I didn't call the cops, he added, stepping closer again. This is theft, fraud. You want to play adult games? You're not ready. Still, I said nothing. I could feel the heat rising around us. Eyes, assumptions, someone shifting nervously in the background. The terminal had gone from bustle to breath hold. I felt the pressure of 100 tiny expectations. Say something, explain, defend yourself. Instead, I stood. No rush, no drama, just one motion. I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't shrink. I paid for the tickets, I said calmly. I canceled them. That's it. No anger, no explanation, just facts. His jaw tensed. You think that's enough? You think that makes this okay? I shrugged once. It makes it done. The words landed heavier than they sounded. It wasn't a punch. It was a release. He stared at me, not sure what to do with a version of me that no longer played by the rules he'd written. I watched the recognition flicker. First disbelief, then the realization that the leverage he'd counted on was gone. You ruined everything, he muttered again, quieter this time. Not to me anymore, but maybe to himself. I already handled it, I said, and that was it. The moment dropped like a stone in a still lake. The ripples moved outward, through my mother, who looked down, through Maddie, who didn't look away this time, through the strangers who, sensing the end, slowly turned back to their lives. There was no grand comeback, no apology, no final blow, just a shift in power. He didn't move. Neither did I at first. We stood like two sides of a door that would never open again. The gate agent glanced over briefly, then turned away. The boarding lane was clear now, quiet again. I bent, picked up my bag, and I didn't wait for an apology. I picked up my bag and turned away. I walked past the vending machines and flickering overhead lights, past the rows of plastic seats filled earlier with impatient travelers. Now it was just a few stragglers and a faint smell of coffee that had burned too long on a hot plate. My bag felt heavier than it should have for how little I packed, but not heavier than what I'd just left behind. Outside, the sunlight hit me differently. Not warm, not cold, just real. The kind of light that doesn't ask you questions or wait for explanations. I kept walking until the glass doors slid shut behind me. That familiar whoosh of separation. Nobody followed. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk where the bus lane curved around the terminal entrance. The sounds were different out here. Distant car horns, a delivery truck backing into a loading dock, someone's laugh from across the lot. Life went on, as it always does. The tension that had filled every breath inside felt out of place in this open air. I set my bag down and took a slow breath, and just stood there. Across the street, a man in a work shirt sipped from a foam cup and nodded at me casually like I was any other guy out in the world on a Tuesday morning. A mother with a toddler balanced on one hip flagged down a cab. Somewhere, a street performer played a saxophone, the sound faint but warm, like a memory I couldn't place. It hit me then, how small the whole scene back there really was when you stepped outside of it. Everything that had felt enormous inside, the accusations, the silence, the power struggle, it had no weight out here. No one knew. No one cared. The world didn't pause to catch up. I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of the crumpled receipt. I pulled it out, just a thin slip of paper, bent where I'd folded it without thinking. The ink was already starting to smudge a little from how tightly I must have gripped it earlier. I stared at the line that confirmed the cancellation. My card, my name, my decision. I could have thrown it away, but I didn't. Not yet. Because for years, a ticket meant freedom to someone else. Proof I was going where I was told. On time. Like I was supposed to. This one, even canceled, meant something different. It wasn't about escape. It was about reclaiming something I didn't even realize I'd given up. The right to decide. I slipped the paper back into my pocket. A few more people exited the terminal, walking past me without a glance. One man lit a cigarette, shielding it from the wind with cupped hands. A teenage girl sat on her suitcase and scrolled through her phone, earbuds tucked in. Nobody noticed me standing there. And that felt good. There's a strange kind of peace in being ordinary after being watched too long. I wasn't the center of anything now. No one was waiting to see how I'd react. No one expected me to clean up a mess I didn't make. I knew I'd get calls. Maybe that afternoon. Maybe in a week. There'd be blame disguised as concern. There'd be cold silences stretching between clipped sentences. There might be guilt trips about what you've done to this family and how you left things. I was ready for that. Not because I liked conflict, but because I finally understood that staying silent for harmony isn't the same as peace. And I wasn't going to confuse the two again. I wasn't angry anymore. That part surprised me. I wasn't proud either. This wasn't a moment for victory laps. There's no medal for walking away from something that hurts you, just air and quiet, and the ache of muscles finally allowed to rest. The truth is, I still loved my mother, and part of me would always wonder what she thought in that moment, whether she agreed and couldn't say so, or didn't and wouldn't. But love doesn't mean staying in a role that erases you. I could love her and still leave the space where I was only ever tolerated, not heard. That contradiction used to keep me awake at night. It didn't anymore. Because the difference now is that I chose to stop asking for something that wouldn't come. And that's not bitterness. That's clarity. There'd be fallout, sure. Birthdays missed. Stories I wouldn't be part of. Maybe even the kind of silence that settles into years without names being spoken. But I could live with that. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd finally accepted that some people only love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything back. And once you stop playing that version, their love withdraws like a tide. Predictable, not personal. I shifted my bag to my shoulder again and started walking. Not with a destination, but with motion. Just forward. There was a bench half a block down. I sat there a while, not checking the time, just letting the weight in my chest settle. Not disappear, just settle, like dust after a storm. My fingers brushed the seam of the bag, almost without thinking. It was fraying a little at the corner. I smiled at that. At the small things you don't notice until everything else goes quiet. A loose thread reminded me that even the strongest things show wear after a while. And that's okay. Healing doesn't always feel like healing. Sometimes it just feels like not explaining anymore. I didn't go to Chicago that day, but for the first time, I went where I needed to.